be encouraging to ask them to ask more from their home. It's not just a place to live. That's like the minimum amount you can do per code. It's gotta be, we spend half of our lives in these places. So I think that people need to start to expect a little bit more.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Christi Weber, Director of Design, Lead Designer at TDS Custom Construction. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can ask questions and leave feedback there too. Christi, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. I appreciate it.
Can you tell me what you do as Director of Design and Lead Designer for TDS Custom Construction? What does that mean?
Well, we've been in a little bit of a transition lately, just kind of shuffling some things around, making some things more efficient. And so that the head of design is a relatively new role for me, but we're expanding our staff of designers. So that basically means, someone has to kind of see the grand vision, sort of be in charge and make sure everyone's getting their needs met and has everything available that they need to do their work. So that's kind of my role there, but I'm also still doing my own design work. So I'm the only architectural type designer in our office. So I'm doing things like additions, screen porches, pop-ups, whole house remodels, and some new homes as well. So I've got a full plate right now. Lots going on.
And we should be clear that you are not an architect, but you have studied architecture and you're working on your licensing, right?
I sure am.
You had like a lot of working women, you had to take a break from your career to raise kids, I'm guessing.
Yep, just one daughter, and she took up a lot of my time, and wanted to be able to focus on her for the early formative years especially, and now she's a wonderful support to me as I'm going through my studies and my licensure exams. I'm
glad you're getting a chance to do that. I think that's awesome. How far into the process are you?
I'm exactly 1/6. There were 6 tests, and I've gotten through the first one, and it was a big moment for me, just getting over that first hurdle. I could plug the Young Architects Boot Camp right now for Michael Rasica. I've been participating in that, and it's been really great. It's basically a way that architectural licensure candidates can come together and study together. That's what we did in school. We were
Right.
always together, always learning, bouncing things off each other. It was never in a silo. So that's been a really rewarding experience for me so far.
So having worked in the design field and around the construction business, do you feel that you were have an easier time passing these tests versus someone just out of architecture school?
I would imagine that's true, but nobody is able to go ahead and take those exams until they've completed a certain percentage of their experience training. Mm-hmm. It equates to about 3 years of experience in a design firm. They do have some ways you can earn hours outside of design firms, which I've done a little bit of that. So I would say once you've gotten some of the experience in your architecture firm and you've done some of the studying, I think that it's a fairly even playing field by the time everybody gets there.
What do you think is the difference between your role versus the traditional role of a project architect? Is it similar or is it different?
It is similar, but it's also different in the sense that, so like when you're in a design firm, you typically aren't working with a contractor or a builder unless you have some sort of different contractual relationship set up for that project. So you are in a way doing it, in this silo. You're not necessarily getting input from the people who are actually going to put the parts and pieces together. So I always found that to be challenging as I, being younger in my 20s and looking ahead. And I had heard about the idea of design build, and that really excited me because of that collaborative relationship that can be formed between designers and builders. So now if I have a question or I'm like weighing the options of how to detail something, what would be more cost effective, for example, I can literally walk down the hall and ask somebody that would have the answer to that question. So I really can't say enough about being able to have builder feedback when you're in the process of design. And I think we're seeing more and more of that as time goes along. So I'd say that's the biggest difference, is being able to have access to that while you're designing.
Does your firm work with outside architect or designers too, or is it strictly in-house?
We have worked with outside architects, and we will work with outside architects. It has to be, the right fit, the right project. So it just sort of depends on the unique situation. We've thought about too, just with the massive influx of work that we've had, like how can we start to build more relationships outside? Because that might take a little bit of the pressure off of our design team. But it's still something we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, well, I think the design build model generally is always evolving, right? It's something that probably firm by firm and the global picture has changed.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
So are there other people in the firm with a role similar to yours, or are you the sole lead designer?
I'm the sole lead designer. We have two other designers. They're both interior designers. One has like a kitchen and bath specialty. We've done many, many kitchens and baths over the years. And then we have another interior designer with a commercial background that's taken on our selections and products stuff. Like she's working with the client to sort of craft this vision and help them through the process, which, can be overwhelming for clients to pick out all the things that need to be picked out, especially when they're doing a project for the first time. They've never done anything like this before.
Well, one thing I've heard over and over again from people on the construction end of things is often folks can't make a decision in time for the project to be, kept on track. I'm hoping that role has some implications for that too, that she can make sure that folks get stuff done that they need to be picking out.
Yeah, that is the hope. I mean, we try to get everything selected as much as possible before we start on any project, but there sometimes are lingering things that need to be picked up even after we've started. On
a somewhat unrelated note, have you folks had trouble getting certain kinds of things? I was hearing about appliances recently. Are there other things?
Yes, I've heard about the appliances. We haven't come against that quite yet. I think so. The first thing we were facing was the lumber shortage, and now we're looking at sheet goods like OSB and plywood. The latest has been blue electrical boxes.
Really?
And white. I think this was right. The white outlet covers and switch covers. Go figure. White is kind of a basic thing, but so those are two items right now that have come up for us that are difficult to get, and it's touch and go every day. Some things get better and some things get worse.
No electrical box would stop a project dead in its tracks, right? I mean, you could obviously use a different style or metal or whatever, but you can't move forward if you don't have the wiring all done.
No, you can't. So that's been a challenge, but we have got a lot of great subcontractors that we work with. They've developed a team of great people over the years. So they're all creative, problem-solving types. So I'm sure we'll figure it out.
Keep moving, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk more generally about TDS? What kind of projects do you do? And is it strictly residential, or do you do commercial work too? So it's almost all residential remodeling and additions. I'd say 95% remodeling and additions for residential. We do have a couple new homes that we've done, and I have one on the boards that I'm designing right now, all high performance. So we really want to move into that more and more as we go along, maybe a house or two a year. Because my background is passive house, and the new owner of our company has a passive house training. So that's something we're really passionate about and we want to be doing. So it's not just any new home. We're looking for new homes that really want to meet some good energy goals. And then we've done a little bit of commercial. The most recent thing was the Governor's Mansion Inn here in Madison. And that's a really beautiful project. And I recommend anyone who's going to visit Madison consider going and staying there. That was a really fun project to work on. I didn't have a hand in that, but I got to hear lots of different stories, and I got to see the finished product, and it was really pretty. So
That was one of the commercial projects we worked on, and we may do more in the future. Having it had some historical influence too, which TDS has a deep history of working on historical projects as well.
So, how many employees I'm assuming you use a lot of subcontractors, but I'm guessing you probably have construction folks on staff too. Is that right?
Yeah, it is right. So we've got 7 in the office and then 8 in the field. And we're always hiring. So if anyone's listening and they want to come work at TDS, we'd love to hear from you. Really, it's difficult to find creative and talented field staff nowadays, and we're happy to meet more people that would be wanting to join our team. So we're fairly small, but not tiny either.
Mm-hmm. How many how many projects are going on at one time, or does it vary?
Well, it definitely varies because it depends on the size of the projects, but 8 to 12 is kind of the range where we 8 to 12 going on under construction. But of course, then we have other things that are in design or stuff that's still in the warranty period. But the projects that are currently having a hammer swung, that's about 8 to 12 projects at any given time.
And do folks come to you? I mean, do they come seeking your firm or a design build model, or where are the people coming from?
That's a great question. I mean, we have kind of a 45-minute circle, a radius around our office, and we're right down in the east side of Madison. And we see a lot of people from the local neighborhood, and they basically come to us because they've heard such good things. The reputation is huge and the name is huge. So they see our signs all over the place. They ask their neighbors, and their neighbors have been pleased. And so then they give us a call. I do think people appreciate the design build process, sort of wrapping it all up into one big package. I think makes people feel a little more comfortable. Knowing that they're not going to have to spread their resources so thin.
Do you think they get it? I mean, it sounds like most folks do, but do you have to explain to them what's different about the design build model versus a builder and a designer who work out of different offices?
Only when somebody is considering working with an architect or an outside designer, right? Mm-hmm. If they're thinking about that and they're asking us questions, then we try to explain them through it. But if it's a client who has just basically come to us and maybe they were even looking at other design build firms, we usually, think that they kind of get it. So they're already on board with that model.
That model can be described sometimes as adversarial between the builder and the architect. What do you think is better about the design build model for clients and your own sanity? I'm curious.
Yeah. Like I said before, it's all about the collaboration. I think historically, builders and architects have been kind of set up to, both in terms of contracts, but also in terms of not talking to each other as much as they should. They've been set up to have this adversarial relationship. So I really feel like the collaboration is key, not just amongst builders and designers, but we have a strong focus on the team at our company, and that has been the case at other companies that I've worked at. So, not one person can know everything. I think that's something that we all have to start to understand, that as things get more complicated and complex and we're doing more challenging projects, you just can't do that without multiple people. You have to have a collaboration between all the experts coming to the table. You start to think about something like the medical field and all the specialties that are involved in that. You don't necessarily expect a podiatrist to understand the ears or the eyes, for example. They've gone to a different specialty. So in our field, we're not necessarily specializing other than residential or commercial. But like I said, it's going to take a teamwork approach, and it's going to take collaboration to basically do anything that we want to do going forward as a society, as a globe in the coming years. So I have a couple pieces of advice though. I would say it's really interesting for builders to start to learn about the design process. The people in our office that have a production background, They get a chance to see the designs and learn about what goes into design and understand the value and be able to communicate that value to others. And I would also say that, like young architects or young designers who are wanting to get into design and are interested in collaborative relationships or just getting their stuff built, which is kind of the point of going to design school. You guys got to get out there and participate in some construction projects, like whatever opportunity you have. It's just Habitat for Humanity or friends building his garage or whatever it might be. I think it's really important for both builders and designers to cross over the line and try to understand where the other one is coming from.
Uh, so why do you think it's important for builders to understand the design process? I mean, we've seen so many ugly things out there, right? Is it just about that, or is it more than that?
I think it's not just builders understanding, but it's kind of everyone understanding. The design process I've noticed over the years is kind of like this really mystical thing. Like people don't necessarily get it. Like, what is that? What happens there? It's like I have to like draw back the veil and say, come on in, like it's okay. It's not a secret. But it is, even when people ask me to describe the design process, I'm like waving my hands around and talking about lots of ideas and casting a wide net and pulling them in and mixing them up. And it's difficult to describe. So I think there's a inherent value in that, not just for the project, but for owners specifically. And there's a sense of trust that you build as a designer with the client because you're responding to their needs, you're understanding their needs, and then you can become an advocate for that client. They might not be able to communicate to the builder why the heck they've done things, but as designers, we can help them with that. So if builder understands where designers are coming from and what that sort of messy but intentional process is, I think that's going to help them a lot in the collaboration and producing a good product that meets their clients' needs.
And what do you think the advantage is to young architects or designers getting out and hands-on construction environment? What is gained by that?
It's if you draw something, you're making a framing plan, you put a joist hanger in. Like, what does that mean? What does it really look like? How do you install it? To be drawing something that you've never actually seen or held or worked with in real life, I think can put you at a disadvantage as compared to someone who does have more construction experience. You could be drawing a wall section and think, oh, this works really well. It's good cost wise. It's good from an insulation perspective. And then you tell someone to build it, and they're like, "Well, how do I sequence that? Like that doesn't seem right. I'm putting this in before that, but I'm not going to have this on site." So it doesn't really make any sense once it goes out into the field. Like it looks nice on paper, but if you don't really understand how buildings are built and in what order, you may end up in a situation where you have to go back to the drawing board and do something different
And
once
you'll
you
have
do get builder feedback.
people saying bad things about you, right?
Sometimes that happens, yeah.
I think it's fair to say you're passionate about high performance home building, so much so that you are Wisconsin's first certified passive house consultant. How did you learn about passive house, and what do you like about it?
I So I learned about it a long time ago. It was, like one
When
of
you were
my
a
first.
student?
No, I learned about it in my first job, and I was at a sustainability consulting firm, and this was almost right after I left grad school. Um, and I just kind of saw it when I was researching some other things, and I was like, "Oh, that looks cool. I like that," and I put it in my back pocket. And then it came up again years later when I was, ready for. I just was kind of feeling like I needed the next thing. I needed to raise my education level about high performance homes or high performance in general. And I was like, and it was, we had the 2008, um, recession and things were a bit slow. And I was like, this is the opportunity. So this is when Passive House was doing in-person training. So I spent a couple weeks in Chicago learning everything I could about Passive House, and then took the test and became, yeah, Wisconsin's first certified Passive House consultant. And since then, we have many more, and we've all found each other. And we have started a chapter of the Passive House Alliance in Wisconsin. So we're still small, but we're working towards something bigger. Like we look at the Hudson chapter, the Chicago chapter, and kind of like big brother and sister. We'd love to be as have as much impact as they do. And things I like about it, it's so simple, yet it has such a high impact. It's Passive House takes conservation approach, which I really like. Instead of a lot of active systems, geothermal is great, solar panels are great, but it's like this: you make this thing that can passively resist the climate that it's presented with, right? So lots of insulation, great air tightness, good doors and windows. We utilize passive solar whenever we can. Of course, we have continuous ventilation, and all of those things together really make for deep energy reductions. And you haven't really done a whole lot of complicated stuff. You've built a really good wall that should last for hopefully 100 years, and now you're just sitting there like collecting the benefits of having like lower energy bills. And then there's all of that stuff that's like you can't put a price on. You walk into a passive house and you're like, wow, it's so quiet. Wow, look at this daylight. Oh, the air feels so good. It's not dry, I don't feel lethargic when I breathe it. There's all these things that people say when they walk into a passive house or spend some time in a passive house that are like naming these values that we couldn't necessarily put a price on. And then I also think it's the fastest, closest way to get to net zero quickly, because once you've reduced all your energy by, I don't know, 80%, 70%, then you can put some solar panels on, and they're a little bit more affordable, and you can probably fit them on your roof now because you need less of them. And then you get to net zero. And that's really my goal, as for all of us in the long term, is that we're using way less energy, perhaps none at all, and just using these passive elements, plus a little bit of active solar to get us to where we need to be.
Is it enough to build a passive house without certifying it? I think you'd agree that it's a not insignificant expenses to get the certification. Is it okay to just build a passive house without having it certified?
Being a member of the Passive House Alliance, I dare not say that it's okay. I do think that there are some situations where you may be able to do that. If somebody is a designer who's experienced, we're bringing someone who can do the energy modeling. We're working with a builder who's really experienced. We still do third-party things like blower door tests and verifying that everything's put together right and all the air sealing is done correctly. If you have a really, really good team and the owner just does not want to go through that process, I would rather do that than not do it at all. So
I think that's a great way to answer that. I really do. So what changes or features that are found in modern homes that you really like? You mentioned efficiency. Are there other things that are better than they used to be?
That's a tough question to answer, because it comes down to the word modern, and what does modern mean? It's like,
I guess
today,
homes built today, not necessarily a modern aesthetic, but the
right.
techniques and expectations we have of a home built in the last few years.
The things I like about modern homes, or at least the ones that are well done, and what I see is just kind of simplicity, not being, overly fussy about things like ornamentation and things like that. Like I love Scandinavian design. I love modern design. So I like to see things that are a bit simpler. The daylight, when people, whether it be like a builder working like Viridian Homes or something like that, which we have here in Dane County, or if it's just a one-off design like architect designed, when people get the daylight right, that really makes such a huge impact in the experience of a home. My home right now, like our south-facing facade is actually like the shortest facade. And that's really too bad, because all of this light comes into our stairwell and we don't get any, throughout the rest of the house. And light just makes a home sing, and it makes people, within it feel better as well.
And they may not realize why, right?
Right. No, they don't always realize why. People I work with on passive houses understand why in theory, but not until they actually live in the house are they like, wow, this is huge. This makes this huge difference in my life. And I just love being in my home.
That must be satisfying.
Yeah, it is.
What do you see in new homes that drive you crazy?
Oh, what do I see in new homes? As someone who went through formal architectural training, I think that the exterior of a building should be reflective of what is going on inside. So it's difficult for me to hear like, well, can you just put like a little dormer here and can you just put a little thing there? It's like, well, okay, well, why are we doing it? What is the intention behind it? What is the purpose of that? So when I look at a house and it's like, it's embedded in the landscape, it's reflective of the context, it talks, the language of the exterior is giving cues to the people that are arriving or visitors, what's going on the inside. That's the kind of thing I like to see. That's the thing that really gets us architects, or not me, I'm not an architect yet, but gets us designers excited. In terms of like clients, like nothing really drives me crazy. But I do push, like as designers, we always have to understand that we aren't order takers. People hire us because we're professionals. We have opinions. You just saw a bunch of mine. And that's why they want to know what our opinions are, is because we can potentially help push them in a better direction that, and results in a more meaningful project.
Are there some clients that you just can't work with? It's just like they're not going to get it. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah. I think that homeowners, consumers need to understand that if you are going to be working with a designer, you need to be involved. This is not a hands-off experience. We can't read your mind. We don't offer that service. Mm-hmm. If we did, it'd be quite expensive. And we need you to participate with us fully in the process, because the most beautiful design comes from constraints. And the constraints that are given to us by the client are the biggest ones that we have to work with. And if we don't understand what a client's looking for or what they're up against, or just sort of their feelings about things, we can't design something that's going to work for them. So I feel like, when people don't understand it's a participatory process, that can make it really difficult, I'd say.
Are there some folks that just can't articulate what they want? How do you get that out of them?
Questions.
Yeah.
Lots of questions, images. Sometimes we'll encourage people to go start looking at like hows, or just browsing magazines or the internet. Sometimes we'll pull some images together to show them. And then sometimes we just work with them to design multiple iterations of things. Like you could have, a space and say, well, this is how it could be if you did this, and this is how you could be if you did that. And I think we're really understanding. We work with all sorts of different kinds of people, and we really have to meet them where they're at. That's our job.
Are you generally happy with the quality of construction you see when you drive around town? Like, are things being built well to last a long time?
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't driven around much in the last year, as you can probably imagine.
Right.
I don't. Whenever I see like urban infill happening, whether they be commercial buildings or residential additions and things like that, most of the time what I'm seeing is fairly good. But again, people are designing and building against these constraints, so there's only a few little options. But when they have that wide open farm field, that's what just hurts my very soul sometimes. And I'm sorry to everybody out there that develops those kinds of projects.
Is it the development's the problem, or they're just ugly houses, or is it both?
I feel that it's both, And I mean, in their defense, a custom design home for every single person is just not going to be practical, right? How could we possibly get there? So it really, the onus does lie on developers to do things that are going to sort of bring us into the next generation of design. And it's really difficult for me to see these things just going up so quickly, just overnight, and all of a sudden there's a neighborhood there. Some of the things I'm seeing are questionable in terms of quality. I worry a lot about things like mold or water infiltration and whatnot. And I'm concerned about, the choices that we're making as American consumers, where we really do value the granite countertop more than we value the more unsexy things that are inside the wall.
How do we get folks to see those things as valuable? I ask this a lot to my guests on this show. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I will say this: if people can go see a passive house, for example, or a high performance home and spend any amount of time in it, I think that's more convincing than anything that you could ever say. But I think the other part is, my folks here in Wisconsin, we go around and we present to different people. We talk to all sorts of people, and people get excited about it. But the one question we're always getting is, great, how much? How much more? And I am personally not satisfied with the answer that we have yet. So our group has been doing work on sort of this cost analysis, where we've developed a prototype house, an imaginary prototype house, and we're assigning different things to it, certain levels of insulation, certain levels of air tightness, and things for the doors and windows and whatnot. And we're in the process of putting together the costs on that. So looking from a Madison perspective, a Door County perspective, Milwaukee, and then way up north in Wisconsin. So we can start to assess, like, here's what it costs in terms of percent more to build a house like this, versus just, going out to the farm field and picking up one of those. And we don't really have the answer yet. We're still working through it. But I think that cost, my hope is that it's about the same, because
that's what I hear
things. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's what I hear. And I hope you can demonstrate that, because you have smaller heating and cooling systems, you have lower energy costs. So when all this stuff is taken into in totality, it would seem like it's a wash.
It might be, but I don't feel like we have the way to prove that yet. And consumers are smart. They do know what they're talking about when it comes to money, because everyone's got to deal with money. So unfortunately, so stay tuned for that. We're going to be working more on that. And my guess is that we're going to have a couple different prototypes that come out of it. So we can say, this is how much it would be if it's a slab on grade. This is, how much it would be if you have to have a basement. Maybe there's 2 levels of different insulation. I'm not sure, but it's under development. And I really think that knowing that and be able to say that, say what that cost increase is, or even if it's zero, I think it's going to be really convincing to a lot of people.
Do you think that's a harder sell in the Midwest to build a passive house versus other places in the country?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that I think about quite a bit. Usually any of this stuff starts on the coasts and travels inward. Even though the passive house community is centered in Chicago and in Illinois, it still seems like people on the coast pick it up a little bit faster. I mean, the reasons for that out east, I think, are just the sheer cost of energy. We have cheap energy, which comes in the form of natural gas, which is not always the case on the East Coast. On the West Coast, it's a little bit easier, cost effective potentially to achieve passive house. We have this
because the climate is milder.
Climate. Yeah, exactly. And then we also have, we haven't picked up the higher energy codes that a lot of other states have so far. So the cost comparison to code in our state is a lot greater than it might be in another state that's already kind of leapfrogged ahead into a more stringent energy code. So it does seem a little bit more challenging, but that's the work we're doing, and hopefully we can get there.
What do you expect to see in the next 10 or 20 years with regard to American housing? What would you like to see? You said before that maybe passive house isn't for everybody, but what should we be doing?
Um, we need to be more intentional about what we're doing. We need to be thinking through the impacts of the things that we're asking for. I was talking about, the farm field with the houses and the developers. Like, people want that because they've been told that they want that. And that is the huge amount of what is available out there. So we need to, start educating people. We need to be encouraging to ask them to ask more from their home. It's not just a place to live. That's like the minimum amount you can do per code. It's got to be, we spend half of our lives in these places. So I think that people need to start to expect a little bit more. I also think that we need to start getting ready, like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, for, the climate change stuff that is happening. I think that we're going to start to see people move inland more and more. In fact,
Why do you think that?
I think we're going to see rising sea levels. I think we're going to see the high cost of things like wildfires. We already have evidence here in Madison of people moving from California or the West Coast just because it's just too expensive and it's too risky and things like that. And there's this idea of climate haven cities that sort of cropped up in the last couple of years, and Madison is definitely considered one of those climate haven cities. So I think we need to start getting prepared for how to accommodate these people that potentially could be moving in. And Zoom, we've seen the last year, the pandemic, Zoom and remote work has made people way more mobile. I have a friend, they moved down to Austin, Texas, but one of them still has a job here in Madison, and she can do that remotely. So as a society, we're just changing for so many reasons, mobility and climate change, and I want to see people open up to more options. Can we have ADUs, an accessory dwelling unit, in our backyards? Can we have non-traditional living environments where people are living with aunts and uncles or grandparents? Can we do row houses and start to have more density? I think it's just we have to let go of that sort of like colonialist vision of everybody in their own house, the white picket fence and a big yard. I think we need to be exploring better options and have better plans.
I think you'd agree the biggest obstacle in changing people's thinking is that they want a single family house, but they probably shouldn't, right? I mean, but we've all been taught that that's what you should attain in life, right?
Yeah, that is what we've been taught. And I don't think everybody necessarily needs that. It sort of depends on who you are. I think that we can, as we start to see more interesting options, especially young people, they're not necessarily as interested in that house with the yard, but they want walkability. They want to be able to get on their bike and ride down to the farmer's market. They want less maintenance to deal with because, they want to focus on their kids and their community and their jobs and enjoying life. So I think that I would like to see people start to question a little bit more about like what they need and what they're looking for. But until, the sort of building community and the developers community start to present them with those options, I don't know that things are necessarily going to change.
And I think you'd probably agree that folks with single-family homes often are the ones who are an obstacle to multifamily development in their towns, right? They see that as a risk to their property values and, clogging their schools. And, that's an uphill battle.
It sure is.
If you were going to design a home for your new home for yourself, what would it be like? And what would it be like?
Yeah. Well, now that I just talked about how we should start, coming away from single family homes, I actually, I'm doing this no home thing. I'm in the remodeling business, but I still have my eye on all of this existing housing stock that we have. We could build exactly the amount of houses that we are building right now, and they could all be net zero or passive house certified, and we still wouldn't necessarily meet our energy goals for the housing industry because we have this huge amount of existing houses that are not retrofitted to be using less energy. So my goal, where we are right now, I want to like get my daughter through high school. But then my husband and I would really love to find an existing house in an urban environment and do a deep energy retrofit on it. Thinking about how we can do it creatively so that maybe the costs are a little bit less. I would love it to be net zero. I would love it to be modern. I would love it to be all electric. I would like a, decent enough size yard that we can have a garden, but I don't really need any more than that. We have like a postage stamp right now and we're doing pretty good. I don't think we need a ton. And it also means we're closer to our neighbors. So we know our neighbors more, than we would maybe in a more suburban environment. And then, we both like to use that house as a teaching tool. We want to stick some sensors in the wall and learn from that and contribute to the building science community. We want to, bring people into our home and host tours and give people that opportunity to feel what it feels like to be in a house like this. So it's a little bit selfish, but it's also, a lot about helping grow this movement as well.
Any kind of, consumptive extravagances you would want in your hyper efficient house?
Yeah. So Ian is putting, that's Ian Schwant from TDS, who it hosted recently. He is putting a big ass fan in his house.
Really?
And I am super jealous. I haven't told him this yet, but I love those things. The second I saw them like in a commercial environment, I was like, those are so cool. And I never thought about putting them in a house, but now.
So you're talking about the one that normally goes in a warehouse, not the Haiku, the residential product. You're talking about the big.
Like the big one.
Cool.
That like the brand name is Big Ass Fan.
Yeah.
So I think he's still planning on doing that, but obviously you need like a large sort of open space in order to accommodate one of those. So, but I think they're really neat. So I wouldn't mind having one in my house either.
That was not what I was expecting you to say, but that is awesome. Can you tell me about your own house that you're living in now? My guess is it's probably from the 20s or 30s based on the glass doorknob and the smooth panel, right?
Yep, it is. It's a 1929 Dutch colonial in the east side of Madison. So like I said, small lots. High density, lots of houses from this era. We've really come to love this house. We found out some interesting history. The person who built it, the owner built it himself or was very involved in the construction. We found like another address on file and basically realized that he was living in the garage. So he lived in the garage and fitted it out with, there was like a toilet because we found some drains and there was knob and tube in there and there was an old fireplace, evidence of an old fireplace. So he lived in there while he worked on this house. And I thought that was really interesting. And then of course the garage needed some major help. It was really falling down and caving in and it was bad. So we actually rebuilt the garage, we're still working on it. We don't have siding on it. And we're like, well, we can't have our net zero house now. So can we do like a high performance garage? And it's kind of an oxymoron, right? Because we did, I think, 8 to 10 inches in terms of insulation for the envelopes, that's bone and cellulose. But then we have this big hole called the garage door. But we've been amazed by how well it's actually functioned, some space heating. And it actually will coast even through some of the more frigid temperatures that we've had. Eventually, it loses all of its heat, but it loses all of its heat way slower than, your standard garage. Maybe you might put some fiberglass in or something.
That's cool. And, having a good garage in your climate is no small thing. I think you'd agree.
Yeah. And now we're just calling it's a shop that sometimes we're going to put car in because it's kind of it's a pretty bomber garage, if I do say so myself.
You've mentioned your husband a couple times. What does he do? What is his interest in passive house? Did you bring him along, or was he in on this from the get-go?
No, he had already drank the Kool-Aid. Actually, I met my husband at TDS. He's currently our production manager.
Oh, cool.
So we're on the same page about a lot of things, and it wasn't. I didn't have to get him on board. He was already there, so we learned from each other.
Wow, you two are going to be the model for the rest of us to build a high-performance home. I can't wait. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Christi. Is there anything you want to ask or tell our listeners before we part company?
I think we hit on most of the topics, but I will share that, if anyone's thinking right now about building anything, remodeling or otherwise, new construction, I always recommend people get started early. That's like the worst thing for a designer is when they come in and they want to get going like tomorrow. And, not only is production crazy right now, we're so busy, and I think everybody across the country is facing that. But also it doesn't give the time to like put the real thought and effort into it and plan it well. So I would say, just to get a good design process out of it, to get the product that you want, and also to get it at all because we're so busy, start planning early, bring your designers in early, bring your builders in early. And I think you're going to get a really good product if you do it that way.
Good advice. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Christi Weber for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Hey, Christi, do you want to plug your radio show?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Larry Mueller does a show on the Ideas Network, which is part of Wisconsin Public Radio. And there's a wonderful guy named Chad Spate here in in Madison that is also a design builder. And he invites different folks on throughout the year to share the experience. Listeners call in and they ask questions about remodeling, and we do our best to help them.
That's fantastic. I got to listen to that.
That'd be great.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, keep craft alive, and happy building.